This is a review of The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug. Smaug, Unleashing the Dragon. So this book is very much a companion to the Hobbit Chronicles series. So if you have any of those books or you've seen the reviews I've done for those, you'll sort of know what to expect. It's just a lot smaller in terms of the format and shorter in terms of the number of pages. It's about 100 pages, and overall it really does feel just like a light version of the Hobbit Chronicles. And that's not only physically, but also in terms of the number of comments and text, number of pictures. There's a lot less of that, although still a pretty decent amount of images considering the size of the book. But despite the fact the book is a lot less impressive than the main Chronicle series, both physically and in terms of content, it still feels like part of the same series. It's a very consistent experience. It's still written and overseen by Daniel Faulkner, who did all the other Hobbit Chronicle books. So it really does sort of feel like a small collection of pages that they're like, oh, this is the stuff we had to cut from the main series. On the one hand, because it is sort of only 100 pages and the content is a little more sparse than the main series of books, and I do suspect that if they were forced to, they easily could have included this Smaug material in some of the other books. And I guess the sort of cynical view is to say, they've cut this content from the main game and are trying to get you to pay for the DLC to make more money. But I don't think that's the case. First of all, if you've watched the appendices on the Blu-rays, you'll know that Smaug was designed really, really late into the process. In fact, when An Unexpected Journey came out in cinemas, Smaug actually has 4 legs. That's since been changed for the DVDs, but that means it could have just been a case of when the Desolation of Smaug art books were coming out, they perhaps didn't have enough time to get Smaug's design work to print. I'm not sure. Also, another reason I think it's kind of nice that Smaug has his own book is that it's sort of following a precedent for Lord of the Rings. Gollum, who was the major CGI character of that trilogy, received his own book. So for Smaug being the major CGI character of this Hobbit trilogy to have his own book actually kind of makes sense. But my favorite thing about this book is that by having a book just on one subject, they're really able to present a case study of digital creature design, which, except for that Gollum book that I mentioned before, I have never seen done. So in that respect, this book does have that as an advantage over the main Hobbit Chronicles series, because they were very much focused on art and design, set dressing, costumes, etc. for the entire movies. This book actually sort of expands the scope in terms of the areas of filmmaking it's looking at, because there is a lot of stuff on the digital end. So it's really cool to have this character as a case study to go from the earliest concept art designs, from everything, from the texturing of his skin, animating him, into the sort of final frames of the film. And I think for people interested in filmmaking and especially creature design, that is something we don't get a lot, to see something taken all the way through from A to Z. Although actually, I think there is one aspect that they kind of missed out on in this book, because this book starts at the concept art process. I think they could have added a few pages before that, perhaps just talking about the way the writers and Peter Jackson were trying to adapt Tolkien's dragon, or even talking about Smaug in the book, or even you could go further and talk about the dragons who influenced Smaug, to really give a sort of complete evolution of how a digital character like Smaug comes to life on screen. It's also important to remember that this book came out after the Desolation of Smaug, but before the Battle of the Five Armies, so this book doesn't have any discussion on Smaug's attack on Lake Town or death. But thankfully that sort of stuff is picked up on and continued in the Battle of the Five Armies, The Art of War, which is the 6th Hobbit Chronicles book. So I think ultimately this isn't the sort of book that I would necessarily give a sort of blanket recommendation to everyone like I did with the main series of Hobbit Chronicles books. Instead, I really do think this is for, people who are, if you're specifically interested in Smaug, of course, but also, like I said, people interested in digital characters or creatures more specifically. But then also people who, like myself, really are just sort of a big fan of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, who want the most exhaustive making-of experience possible. You'll definitely appreciate having this book to sort of round out your Hobbit Chronicles collection.